Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. Beneath the apostolic archive, the scent of stone, older than memory, rose with the dust. A low shudder moved through the floor as the jackhammer bit too deep, not loud enough to alarm but enough to shift weight long settled. The workers froze. One turned, eyes narrowed at the sound of stone slipping against stone. Dust curled in the stale air like breath held too long. A beam cracked. Silence thickened. Behind the shattered wall, darkness yawned open, not the void of absence, but something denser. There had been no record of a chamber. No blueprints spoke of it. Still, a stairway descended at an unnatural angle, as though built in denial of the architecture above. The walls bore no carvings, no Christian iconography. Just a series of evenly placed niches, empty, untouched. At the base, behind a sheet of warped iron once bolted shut from the inside, sat the reliquary. Not ornate, not gilded, just a box. Cedar, bound in corded leather now cracking with age. The clasp had long since rusted through. A copper disc lay nestled in linen folds, dulled green at the edges. Its weight felt wrong, too light, too warm. The manuscript beneath it, curled and yellowed, gave off a faint scent of oil and mildew. Every mark of it whispered of hands long dead. No fanfare met the discovery. No officials summoned crowds or cameras. The archivist logged it as unclassified, vault debris. A brown envelope, a shelf in the sub-basement. No questions. Weeks passed before anyone read the first line. Even then, it was by accident. The technician had stayed late, waiting for a server to finish its cycle. Out of boredom or impulse, the envelope had been pulled open. The copper disc, etched with strange alignments, slipped from its wrapping. It hummed against the concrete floor, not audibly but deep enough to feel in the chest. No lights dimmed. No wind stirred. Still, something shifted. Slight, the way a room feels different after a phone call ends, even if nothing was said. The technician blinked twice before moving the piece back inside, wrapping it tighter than before. The text on the manuscript resisted translation. The script was Latin but archaic, fragmented. Phrases repeated like refrains, not chants but instructions. The words expecta in noct caelestis ordinem recurred, wait in the night for the celestial order. The handwriting changed halfway through, as if the hand that began had failed to finish. The second hand trembled, the ink blotted. The document dated older than anything else stored in that sector. 8th century. Verified. Tested twice. No forgeries detected. The Vatican Linguistics Office asked no follow-up questions. At the archive desk, a silent notation appeared in the internal records. Relic unfit for public release. Hold for reassessment. No reassessment followed. Just silence. The reliquary remains in the lower vault, locked behind 3 doors no longer on record. A key sits in a drawer that no one claims to have opened. And above, in the cathedral's highest window, a ray of morning sun breaks differently across the nave, bending half a degree eastward. No one has yet accounted for that either. The document was passed without ceremony. No protective gloves, no reinforced case. Just a folded sheet of linen parchment, its edges browned like paper held too close to flame. The ink bled in places, but most of the lines held their form. Not cursive, but measured hand, sharp at the corners, written without hesitation. Not hurried. Not decorative. As if whoever wrote it knew the space available and used it down to the final stroke. In a room with no windows, beneath 3 levels of stone, a linguist adjusted her glasses without looking up. The scroll had already been laid flat, corners pinned gently beneath worn prayer books. Light from the desk lamp caught faint grooves in the parchment, as though the pressure of the quill had pressed beyond the surface. The first sentence translated easily. A prayer. Standard format. Benediction on the house of the scribe. But by the 3rd line, the rhythm broke. The syntax grew ancient, formal beyond even ecclesiastical Latin. She paused at a word not found in any liturgical index. Exitum ultimum. Not exodus, not in the way it was used in Scripture. The form suggested a departure, yes, but not of a people, not of faith. It referred to something larger, something final, not a departure from a place, a departure of the place itself. 3 more hours passed without interruption. She didn't notice the chill rising from the floor, or the way her fingers moved less freely. What caught her attention was the repetition. Every few paragraphs, the phrase appeared again. Domus nostra post stellis movetur. The first time, she translated it in her head without writing it down. Our home moves beyond the stars. A poetic flourish, she thought. Metaphor for transcendence, perhaps, but it returned. 4 times. Each one placed at the end of sections that otherwise described celestial events in measured detail. She adjusted the lamp, tilted it toward the bottom edge of the page. A diagram, faint, almost erased, caught the light. Circular in design. Concentric. Not labeled, not annotated. No lines of scripture referenced it. She traced its shape with her eyes alone. 1 central point. 7 smaller points around it. No clear geometry. Not a star map. Not any pattern she recognized. The linguist reached for a magnifier, held it just above the surface. The parchment trembled slightly under the glass. Not a vibration. A misalignment. As if the ink itself resisted focus. Her breath slowed. Eyes scanned the surrounding text again. 1 word stood out from the passage below the diagram. Domus. She read the line again. Domus nostra post stellis movetur. Not metaphor. Not flourish. A sentence. A statement. Present tense. Our home moves. Not spiritually. Not symbolically. Moves. She marked the translation in her notes, paused, then underlined it twice. That night, as she walked through the courtyard toward the residence, she looked up. The stars felt unfamiliar. Not absent. Just misarranged, like photographs slightly out of sequence. She stopped once, hand on the iron railing, and stared long enough for her breath to mist. In her pocket, the copied sentence repeated silently in her mind. Not because she believed it, not yet, but because the grammar was correct, clean, unmistakable. No ambiguity in the Latin. Our home moves beyond the stars. The copper disc arrived wrapped in cotton, marked as archival debris. No instructions. No annotations. Only a thin wax seal impressed on a folded tag, read unnumbered. The assistant at the observatory desk assumed it was a calibration relic from one of the older astrolabe collections. Unwrapping it released the smell of worn metal and something faintly resinous, like sap burnt long ago and cooled into dust. It bore no inscriptions on the reverse. Just the face, an etched field of curved lines intersecting with angular notches, too precise to be decorative. The surface, dulled with time, resisted cleaning until the cloth was replaced with wood ash and oil. Not standard protocol, not approved, but effective. The shapes emerged slowly. Shallow engravings. Not script, not language. Measurements. One of the physicists leaned closer without touching it. The eyes didn't search the design for meaning. They measured. Not with certainty but with recognition. The disc displayed positions. Angles mapped in ratios familiar only to those who spent years charting star drift across multiple epochs. But the arrangement was wrong. Familiar, but wrong. A constellation mirrored, warped, pulled too far west of known galactic orientation. He fetched a copy of the current epoch's star chart. Laid it side by side. Nothing aligned. Checked again, this time using software, adjusting for light distortion, for axis tilt, for galactic rotation. The system didn't crash. It corrected. The alignment formed only after accounting for movement, thousands of years projected forward. Not 20. Not 100. 12,000. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat in the wooden chair at the corner of the lab, arms crossed, jaw set. No disbelief. No exclamation. Only silence, held too long for comfort. Another stepped forward, ran fingers along the inner ring of the disc, noticing the uneven depth. Not carelessness. Deliberate variation. The deeper the notch, the farther the position projected from the galactic core. It wasn't a diagram. It was a fixed view from a moving position. He stood, moved toward the telescope bank, adjusted coordinates manually, keyed in the direction marked by the outermost curve, waited for alignment. The screen displayed a dark patch with no notable stars. Just background. Emptiness. He rotated the instrument. Not to correct. To confirm. Once. Twice. 3 times. Always the same. The disk didn't reflect the sky from here. It reflected it from elsewhere. A future location. A vantage not yet occupied. On the table, the copper grew warmer beneath the bulb, though the heat source sat a full meter above it. Someone checked for residual charge. Nothing. Static 0. But the metal felt wrong to the touch. Not in temperature. In memory. As if the hand, once lifted, could still feel its shape minutes later. The disk's design didn't match any known astrological system. Pre-Ptolemaic, possibly. But it followed principles only grasped after Kepler. Engraved long before lenses ever shaped glass. Long before humans watched stars with more than their eyes. One physicist took a photograph. Another didn't. Not from caution. From instinct. As though capturing it would fracture something best left whole. By morning, the disk had been placed inside a lead-lined case. No labels. No timestamp. Just silence again. Not avoidance. Reverence, perhaps. Or the thin awareness that what was known yesterday no longer applies today. Not because the laws changed, but because someone knew them long before they were written. No official channels. No conference briefings or departmental memos. Just an email, plain text, sent from a disposable account routed through 2 outdated servers in Sweden. Attached. A clean vector scan of the copper disk's surface, stripped of metadata, stripped of context. Labeled simply as artifact projection, unknown source. The recipient didn't ask questions. Too many years in observatory archives taught restraint. Questions delayed analysis. He opened the file, ran a basic pattern matching program. Expected nothing. A false alignment, maybe. A misinterpreted planetary orbit from a forgotten civilization. But the algorithm hesitated. Not crashed, paused. Like a breath drawn through teeth. The shape resembled no current formation in the sky. Not one observable from Earth. Not one visible in any hemisphere. He adjusted the epoch settings. Rewound the celestial field by centuries. Nothing matched. He pushed forward. A low click sounded from the hard drive when the year passed the 10,000 mark. Not mechanical. A digital tick of completion. 12,000 years ahead, the constellation appeared. Recognizable. Precise. Not just a loose fit. Exact. 7 primary stars in the same angular spread. Same arc, same projection distortion caused by Earth's lateral drift across the Orion arm. He reset the model twice. Each time, the same configuration snapped into place at that point in the future. No deviation. He added background noise, randomized values, distorted axis input. Still held. He pulled back from the terminal. Not from fatigue. From distance. The image on the screen didn't feel historical. It felt predictive. Not prophecy. Calculation. Cold, indifferent. He called no one. Not yet. Only checked the input file again. No embedded watermark. No timecode. Whoever provided it understood how to erase trace. Whoever engraved it knew what the stars would become long after memory forgets our place in them. Another astronomer was brought in the next day, shown the same image without preamble. No one told her what to look for. Within 20 minutes she isolated 3 stars in alignment with Earth's galactic trajectory. Her notes included only a single word: future. The scan was passed, encrypted this time, to a private university lab specializing in galactic cartography. A professor, recently returned from sabbatical, glanced at the file while sipping coffee in a dim room lined with equipment still boxed from transport. He blinked once, twice. The mug stayed untouched for the next 6 hours. He ran simulations without disclosing origin, modeled long-term drift across the solar neighborhood. He fed in the velocity of the local bubble, factored in gravitational drag, tidal influence from the Sagittarius arm. The disk's pattern matched a projected view from Earth's path 12 millennia forward. But not from Earth's sky. From Earth itself, as it would be seen, not looking up, but looking out. He printed the simulation frame and pinned it beside an antique star chart on his wall. The contrast unsettled him. The stars had not changed, only the position from which they were viewed. Like a memory that refuses to match the photograph. He closed the file without saving, packed the print into a sealed envelope, and mailed it to a private contact in the Alps. No return address. Just a note enclosed with the coordinates. No signature. No commentary. Just 2 lines of type. Galactic position consistent with drift. 12,000 years ahead. Not theoretical. The data converged without prompting. Each simulation, run separately across 3 institutions, mapped Earth's position 12,000 years into its galactic trajectory. Not in theory. Not through approximation. The same coordinates, within margin of gravitational variance, aligned with the etched points on the copper disk. The degree of correspondence erased coincidence. What remained felt more like precision measured backward through time. The final model came from a high-latitude observatory, one known for isolating long-wave cosmic signals lost to urban interference. Their lead technician submitted his findings in person, not digitally. He carried the report printed, sealed, and unsigned. The envelope passed without question through 2 internal couriers before arriving at the Vatican's scientific secretariat. A page was opened. No reaction. Just a hand sliding the paper forward across polished oak, where a bishop pressed his thumb into the corner, folded it shut and nodded once. Within 48 hours, a room was prepared beneath the Lateran Palace. Not large. Not ceremonial. A repurposed council chamber where light barely reached the corners. The invitation list included 4 astronomers, 2 physicists, a historian, and 3 theologians fluent in celestial Latin. No media. No recorders. No transcripts. The disk lay beneath a single pane of reinforced glass. No one touched it. The metal, though cooled, gave off the faintest haze, barely perceptible unless standing within arm's reach. No explanation was offered. No one asked for one. The first to speak referenced the alignment. He showed the simulation. Not the overlay. The raw field. Star movement plotted across epochs. When paused at the critical projection, the field froze in a pattern identical to the etchings on the disk. Same arcs. Same angular displacement. He pointed once to a quadrant near the upper left, where a minor binary system tilted off-axis. The anomaly, he explained, had only been catalogued within the last 20 years. It appeared on the disk. A theologian leaned forward, adjusted his collar. He did not address the science. He read a passage from the translated scroll, a line that preceded the diagram. The phrase described the return of the house to its seat of alignment. No metaphor, just sequence. Another voice entered, one of the historians. She referenced a lost apocryphal letter from the 8th century describing celestial dislocation, dismissed in her field as symbolic lament. But its syntax matched that of the scroll. Her fingers paused mid-page. She looked up once, not in fear, not in awe, but in a kind of reluctant clarity. The conversation shifted. Not openly. Through gesture. Through silence between sentences. What had been framed as relic became potential warning. Not of disaster. Of intervention. The question of authorship was raised. Not who, but when. How could a map exist of a future sky, from Earth's precise location, drawn without instruments, centuries before orbital mathematics or drift models? How could that knowledge enter a scroll framed in religious language, locked in a vault no record remembered? The bishop didn't speak until the final 15-minute. He did not argue the science. He asked whether the coordinates had changed. One physicist answered, quietly, that they had not. Earth's movement matched the disk. No deviation. No resistance. The silence that followed lasted longer than the discussion itself. By the next morning, all attendees were reassigned under internal discretion. The disk returned to storage, this time within a structure surrounded by controlled atmosphere and biometric security. The translation of the scroll was removed from all external servers. The only remaining copy was handwritten, stored in a lead container marked with neither date nor author. Within the curia, an unspoken protocol emerged. When referencing the object, it was not named. Not labeled as artifact or relic. Only described in the passive tense. It was observed. It was consistent. It was not to be moved. The file was leaked quietly. Not to media, not to public archives, but across encrypted peer circles, subfolders buried in unrelated datasets, shared without attribution. It carried nothing more than orbital readouts from 3 observatories and a notation on deviation margins. No introduction. No framing. Just a line chart with a curve that bent where it should not have bent. At first, it was dismissed. Instrumental variance. Marginal error. A bad reading from a miscalibrated relay. But the shape returned. Again from Argentina. Then from a quiet station in Finland that logged its reports manually to avoid satellite interference. Each deviation, small enough to ignore alone, echoed the same tilt. The shift was not catastrophic. Satellites remained stable. Solar exposure unchanged. But the math bent sideways. Earth's orbit, long thought inertial, now held a trace of asymmetry, like a track not slightly worn, but gently reshaped. The kind of change too subtle for weather, too precise for natural interference. Conversations broke along familiar lines. Coincidence. Hoax. Noise in the system. A few spoke of deliberate tampering, someone seeding data to fuel hysteria. But none could explain how the readings matched across locations with no shared equipment, no shared software, no shared personnel. One physicist called it gravitational artifact. A passing anomaly, he said, the echo of deep orbit debris. He closed the case in his department's journal with 2 paragraphs of procedural dismissal. No one cited the paper. Others disagreed. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just in footnotes, in late-night video calls, in isolated labs where the windows faced nothing but stars. They plotted the deviation over time, aligning it with Earth's known path through the galactic frame. The alteration held shape, persistent, incremental, exact. This was not planetary drift. This was something else. More simulations ran in silence. The curvature grew by decimal increments, not visible in daily records but undeniable across decade. It followed the coordinates etched in copper with an obedience that no natural system should exhibit. Not prediction. Reproduction. Emails turned cautious. Language shifted. Phrases like unknown input, unclassified acceleration, rotational eccentricity began appearing without attribution. The models predicted Earth arriving at the disk's projected coordinates, within the exact time frame suggested by the drift charts. It was no longer about belief. The data did not care who trusted it. Arguments escalated in closed rooms. Some insisted on a coincidence. Ancient minds guessing by myth and geometry. The disk, they said, was nothing but chance, clever alignment mistaken for prophecy. Others stared at the equations and saw something worse than intelligent. They saw intention. No one spoke of outside forces. No theories of ancient architects or pre-modern civilizations. The implications were quieter than that. If Earth was being moved, it meant control. Not by levers. Not by engines. By calculation. Subtle, uninterrupted, unannounced. A director at a space agency reviewed the readouts alone. Closed the screen. Stared through the tinted glass where stars remained where they always were, indifferent to questions. He whispered a word he hadn't used in years. Not faith. Not fate. Just one word that had no shape in math. Within the sealed corridors of the congregation, voices did not rise, but neither did they settle. Documents were passed without stamp. Footnotes were spoken aloud, citations recalled from memory. The argument was not over the disk. The disk existed. Its existence no longer required defense. The question turned instead to interpretation, and interpretation broke the room in two. One side called it blasphemy by implication. The notion that celestial movement had been charted by unknown hands, long before doctrine embraced heliocentrism, undermined the sacred chronology. If such knowledge predated revelation, what did that make of revelation itself? The suggestion struck at the sequence of divine disclosure: creation, fall, redemption, anchored in time. This, they argued, introduced a fracture. Not in belief, but in the spine of belief. The others viewed the object differently. Not a challenge. A continuation. The markings were not scientific theft. They were insight granted early, hidden for when understanding could bear its weight. Not heresy, but mystery preserved. A manuscript sealed in a crypt not to deceive, but to await the correct question. The argument left no room for compromise. Each position confirmed itself with silence. No vote was taken. No decree issued. But the corridors echoed differently. Phrases once spoken with comfort now passed through clenched jaws. Elsewhere, the disk's coordinates reached the edges of academia, carried on whispers and incomplete abstract. Observatory data had been pulled from journals without explanation. 2 research teams received funding 1 week and saw their grants revoked the next, with no written cause. A peer-reviewed article on long-term drift anomalies vanished from public servers within 48 hours. The journal issued no retraction. Just an error message and a blank placeholder. A cosmologist noticed the pattern first. Her team's submission had passed review. She held the acceptance letter in hand. 3 days later, the journal's issue went live without their contribution. No notification. No response to inquiry. She refreshed the page every morning for 2 weeks. It never reappeared. In private forums, discussion grew cautious. Not discouraged. Just sharpened. Phrases grew shorter. Variables were replaced by initials. Those who had seen the disk's image did not post it again. Not out of fear. Not even protection. Something quieter. As if each repetition scraped something raw in the air between screens. At one university, a professor removed all mention of gravitational drift from his syllabus. Not because it was wrong. Because too many students had begun asking the same question, phrased too similarly, with eyes that lingered too long on nothing at all. Inside the Vatican, documents were reclassified, access permissions rewritten. A digital index was purged of its oldest entry without deleting the file itself. No explanation was issued. No archivist signed the change. A theologian walked alone through the gardens just past midnight, reciting a prayer not out of habit but to test whether it still felt the same. It didn't. It began with telemetry inconsistencies flagged as low priority. A cluster of satellites, distributed across separate agencies, reported signal distortions at equidistant positions along Earth's orbital path. At first, they were dismissed as solar interference, background radiation from minor flares, harmless, predictable, temporary. But the distortions returned with a pattern, arriving on intervals too clean for randomness, too quiet for natural occurrence. Not noise. Instruction. The anomalies congregated near Lagrange points, those gravitational dead zones where forces cancel and hold objects in suspension. Areas of balance, stability, places where nothing should pulse. Yet the signals echoed there. Not loud, just persistent. A hum beneath the system's breath. Cross-analysis showed a drift in frequency consistent with coordinated output. The field aligned across 5 points, each maintaining sync across orbital positions, regardless of satellite model or nation of ownership. Civilian researchers were the first to notice the coordination. A small team monitoring low Earth orbit trajectories found microbursts of electromagnetic resonance repeating at fixed spatial offset. Their report, filed through a neutral database, was pulled within hours. The download page now displays a maintenance notice. Elsewhere, a defense contractor flagged an energy fluctuation near L2. The recording was time-stamped, encrypted, and sent to a lab in Norway for signal processing. The returned file showed symmetry, waveforms spaced in golden ratio intervals. Not environmental, not random, designed. Independent physicists were not consulted. The findings were internalized, locked within agencies, shared only across back channels. A classified paper began to circulate. Not published, carried, printed and folded, passed by hand. Its final paragraph did not offer a theory. Only observation. Earth is not drifting. It is following. The simulations were rerun using gravitational lensing calculations. When adjusted for the anomalies, Earth's trajectory curved not in resistance to influence, but in accordance with it, each tilt subtle, each deviation proportionate. Like a compass responding to an unseen field. A pull, not from a mass, but from alignment. The language of motion rewritten in silence. In closed meetings, the term guidance was whispered, though never printed. The implications outpaced vocabulary. Not propulsion. Not correction. Presence. A shaping of path without contact. The level of calibration implied intention measured in epoch. One research station ceased all publications after confirming their instruments had registered a harmonic sequence identical to the disk's spatial intervals. No announcement. No farewell. Their domain expired without renewal. Some within the Vatican saw the electromagnetic alignment as the second verification. Not of origin, of purpose. The phrase from the scroll, "Our home moves beyond the stars," was repeated, not in translation, but in Latin. Recited in silence across prayer halls by those who had once dismissed it as allegory. In certain circles there was no longer argument, only waiting. What moves the earth is not force. It is coordination. The envelope was delivered by hand. No signature. No courier record. Passed from gloved fingers to a desk already cleared of electronic. The recipient was not named in any official capacity, only known by reference inside a closed circle of astronomical advisors who operated without titles. The envelope was not sealed. It was folded. Inside, a single sheet, translated from Latin by an internal source whose name did not appear. The original parchment remained under lock 6 levels beneath the archive floor, its ink preserved in cedar oil and cold air. The date on the document was clear, AD 741. The century of Charlemagne, of shifting kingdoms and fractured faith. Long before telescope, before orbital understanding, before physics allowed for trajectory. The text did not resemble the structure of a sermon. It was not homily, not prayer, more fragment than prophecy. Short lines, spaced like steps. There shall come a return, not to land, not to law, but to the place of alignment. There the house shall rest, as it once did and will again. The signs will not be given to the eye, but to the motion that cannot stray. Below the lines, coordinate, rendered in a script unfamiliar to any cartographic system of the time. Symbols bound in ratios, suggesting declination, inclination, spatial vector, if such terms had existed when the ink touched the page. The shapes bore no obvious logic, but when mapped onto a modern galactic overlay, they intersected with a known region near the outer corridor of the Scutum Centaurus arm. The coordinates pointed not to emptiness, but to a stellar nursery, a zone of active formation, where radiation bends and starbirth clouds obscure even the strongest signals. Yet from within that chaos, a small number of planetary masses had been identified, objects with irregular density, orbiting in non-random distribution, not gravitationally collapsed but fixed. Among the cluster, several superdense exoplanets rotated in isolation. Their paths were not predictable. Their presence did not conform to expected evolution. They moved less like results and more like relics. The document had never left the vault until that morning. It had remained catalogued under a non-theological classification, buried in an index designed to misdirect. For centuries, it was believed to refer to a theological metaphor, Jerusalem repositioned among the stars. But no interpretation accounted for the numerical precision of the coordinate. No theory explained how such exact placements could originate in a time without star map. The astrophysicist who received the sheet marked the location on 3 separate star charts, each generated from a different epoch model. In every instance, the path of Earth intersected with the region in question at the same point in its projected journey. The return to alignment was not poetic. It was directional. Nothing else was sent. No follow-up, no request. Just the one document, unaccompanied, carried without protection, delivered to someone trusted not because of rank, but because they asked no unnecessary questions. In private notes, one researcher wrote a phrase that no peer would read. It was not addressed to anyone, nor meant for citation. Just ink on a page, pressed without revision. We are going back to a place we've never known. The satellites did not record a spike. No burst. No anomaly urgent enough to trip emergency protocols. What they showed instead was a smoothing, gravitational readings that, for the first time in decades, stopped shifting. For weeks, Earth's orbital drift had whispered of an approach, a narrowing of deviations so exact it suggested conclusion. But conclusion to what, no instrument could answer. What followed was quieter than silence. No alerts. No warnings. Only a threshold crossed without witness. Somewhere above the southern hemisphere, a relay station logged a weightless pause in its solar calibration. Readings held their position longer than expected, adjusted not toward the sun, but away. The system corrected itself before a fault warning could trigger. It was only on review that the shift was noticed, 1/10 of a degree, brief, unnatural, then gone. In observatories across 5 continents, projections failed to match their sources. The stars had not moved. The sensors had not failed. But Earth's place in the model no longer corresponded to expected trajectory. The drift charts, once used to calculate its movement into future positions, now looped. They no longer projected. They confirmed. Alignment had occurred. Quietly. Not announced. Not scheduled. No countdown. Just a match. The Vatican offered no comment. Public statements halted. Scheduled interviews were postponed indefinitely. The linguist who translated the scroll was reassigned without explanation. Archives were sealed without decree. The absence of reaction was louder than declaration. In the hours that followed, weather patterns continued as before. Flights landed without delay. The sea did not rise, and no magnetic field reversed. Everything continued, indistinguishable from the day prior. But there was a stillness not found in climate or current. It pressed into conversation, into glance, into the strange quiet that sits between familiar objects when one is no longer quite as remembered. Astronomers recalculated Earth's position using external references. Triangulation failed. Simulated backtracking produced inconsistent arcs. Time-lapse overlays jittered. The constellations above remained intact, but their relationship to this surface changed. Not visibly. Not measurably in terms the public would recognize. Only in angle. Slight. Like the difference between standing inside a room and standing just outside its door. Those who ran the initial simulations checked their outputs 3 times before deleting the dataset. Not from fear. From the understanding that the projections no longer belonged to a future. At one station in Chile, a technician left his console for the first time in 16 hours, walked outside into the early morning haze, and looked upward. His lips moved, but no sound left them. Not prayer. Not awe. Something quieter. The coordinates had ceased updating. Not stalled. Fulfilled. We are no longer approaching. We are already there. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.